Hi guys, welcome to another webinar tonight. So it's the 11th one, and we are grateful that Pro Futsal's manager and gaffer, Tapia Owens, or John Tapia Owens, depending on how you know him, will be delivering on attacking principles, moulding the space. He, as a player, has played in the Champions League on 3 occasions in Wales. Domestically, has played for a few teams and finished his career with Pro. Broke his hands and came into management a little bit earlier than expected, but from being biased and from coming from the Pro family, he knows an awful lot. So exciting to see what he's got with the attacking principles. So Swan, take it away, Juan.
Cheers, JK. Thanks. So on the different side today, most of you may know me from the other side of presenting these webinars last few weeks. So just want to thank everybody coming back. If you're just joining, I can't be on top of it today, so if you could turn your mics off as soon as you join, it just makes it a bit easier to follow. Any questions that you've got, please leave towards the end, unless it's like an impending question. Then just pop it in the box or stick your hand up, and as I say, we can. I'll try and answer it as we go along. So just to kick us off, I've got a phrase that's resonated with me quite a lot since I've become more of a coach as well. Guys, if you could turn your mics off, it'd be great. One sec. I think somebody's still got their mic on. Cool. So I'll kick off with a phrase which is, with the same space you can make a masterpiece or cause a disaster. Jean Nouvel, which is an architect who's designed the Louvre Museum in Abu Dhabi and France as well, and this phrase sort of resonated with me, sort of kicking into the coaching career, and more or less my perception on how I see futsal and how we can adapt the space to either benefit us attackingly or from a defensive perspective as well. But today we'll look at it more as an attacking option. So who am I? JK just mentioned previously. So I'm half Spanish, half English. I was born in Spain, but have an English mum. Spent a lot of time growing up here and a lot of time in Spain as well. Day job isn't actually coaching. I'm an architect by trade, hence the interest in sort of space and how that's generated and molded. And lucky enough to sort of design stadiums and arenas currently. And currently manager of Pro Futsal London in the NFS1. Had a great season. Unfortunately, current situation voided. But yeah, we were confident going into the last round of the season that we could have done something special. So playing journey, played football as a kid once I moved over from Spain. Then I moved back to Spain. Lived in a small tiny village out there called Lacrin. Played there football and futsal. Played for Durcal as well, which is the largest city, sort of in Granada in Spain as well. Then moved back for university. Lucky enough to play for Cardiff City futsal, which we won the Welsh division back in 2012 now. Played in the English division 1 year with them as well, against some great players. Then sort of joined the Cardiff University club, where I was at university. Moved then to Oxford City, learned under a great manager, Enrique, played with some great players. And then, as JK mentioned, moved to Pro Futsal to really just sort of get more game time, help out the club, and then unfortunately or fortunately broke my hands, both hands, same bone, which led me to my coaching journey. Now I coached a little bit at Cardiff University, but really got into it, as I say, at Pro Futsal and started to delve deeper into what could be achieved. So I took little parts of everything that I learned, both abroad and in England, and sort of joined that together to create the philosophy and style of play that we wanted to create. So I've got a very simple philosophy, which sort of resonates with attack on the ball, attack off the ball. Now, we'll be focusing more on the attack on the ball today, but for me, the most important thing is to attack off the ball as well, and showing that aggression and intensity throughout the game, and hopefully that's something that, say, a lot of people can sort of see in the identity of Pro at the moment. So the way we approach this, like you see at the bottom, the philosophy which I just mentioned, which is who we are. Then I try to create a structure or a strategy, which is what we try to do, and then tactics, similar for each game, and how we go about it. This is seasonal, sessional, and then of course the game plan. So we've got the seasonal, we've got the playbook, which will have press, breakers in, corners, fly goalkeepers, kick-ins, attacking moves, defensive systems as well. And then based on that, we'll create sessional plans each week based on who we're going to play. And then, of course, it'll be the game plan. Depending on who we're going to play, we'll use elements from the playbook. And then in the sessions, we'll focus on how to implement that game plan itself. So structuring the attacking movement. So the way we try to do it is we look at the opposition. From the opposition, we'll look at the space that we can utilize. We then generate the team tactics. So whether that's attacking the channels or attacking the center based on that space. And then from that, they'll have the individual tactics, which will be the dualities, the parallels, the overlaps, triangulations, everything. As you can see at the bottom there, I try to structure it more towards the team tactics, and that's based on the analysis that we do as coaches, based on the opposition and space. And then how that's executed will be less structured, and that's down to the individuals to implement that. Now they will then implement that based back onto the space and back based on the opposition as well. So it's a sort of circular process, if you want to call it anything. So the way that I look at it is that we're having a talk the other day in a coach's webinar, and from that I sort of came up with the lyrics are given to the players who know that we play a certain genre of music, but they choose the harmonies. So it's within a structure, we sort of give them that freedom to execute that. But at the end of the day, we've studied the opposition. We know or have an idea, an inclination of where the space will be or how we can mold that space. And then they'll execute it based on individual actions and how they see fitting at that moment. So simplify it into plan, train, and execute. So the planning will be mostly coach. The training will be between the coach and the player, and the execution on the court will be the player itself, and that's down to them how they execute that. So let's get on to the topic, which is moulding the space. So we all know a futsal court is 40 by 20, or as I say, some are smaller within the UK. But what was really interesting is that space always stays the same, the total space. So the idea is to mold and modify the space how we want to within certain parameters. Sometimes we may want to reduce that space on one side so we can affect the total available space on the opposite side. So depending on how the opposition or the defensive system is of the opposition, you can see how different the space is. So you could have a compact, narrow defense. If the ball shifts to one side, they could be over here generating or molding more space over this side. If they have split defenses, you can see that the space is predominantly in the center. If they have a wide press, you can see the space there. Individual man-to-man press, you'll see how the space is generated there. And then split lines. So very, very simplified diagrams there. And you can see how different those space or the available space to affect is on each of those diagrams. So like we said before, depending on how the opposition defensive setup is, that will generate certain space. From that, we will create certain attacking movements. But at the same time, it's a bilinear process. So at the same time, our attacking movements can influence how that opposition is defensively set up and can also influence how we are molding that space within the game. Now, that needs to always come within the strategy that we talked about before, and of course, the philosophy. So we're always making sure that those attacking movements follow our strategy and also follow our philosophy as well for the long-term plan. So how will we go about molding the space? You want idea, you want to stretch the play, you want positional play and overloads, collective actions, individual actions, move the opposition, and then quick horizontal transitions when fitting, which can also be switching the play. And kind of why do we want to mold the space? You want to create numerical advantages. You want to create larger space for match plays. So 1v1s, if you're attacking a 1v1, you're more likely to gain that advantage if you're attacking them in a larger space than in a reduced space. And same for a 2v2. In a reduced space, the defenders always have the upper hand. But at the end of the day, we want to create the highest probability of scoring. That's the end game, and that's what we're trying to do. So you can probably divide it between individual and collective movements. The individual movements, which are the feints, the backdoor movements, and the collective movements to influence how we mould that space, which are the positional play and the overloads. Those horizontal transitions, which switch in the play, which talks about. And then, of course, you've got those direct and indirect movements, which could be between pairs, threes, or, as I said, fours as well. So individual, like we said before, you've got those feints, and you can see how that one simple movement can affect that space, where the space is generally in behind here, less space here, and all of a sudden you've got less space behind, but you're in a more prominent attacking position as such. So I just want to show you a quick clip on a goal from this season and how one of our players influenced that space individually. So if we just pause it there, so that it slightly pauses slightly too late, but if you see the pass that Denison played in, he's predominantly left-footed. That first movement into here allows the defender to engage there and then allows him to gain that advantage into where the space is behind now the defenders. Now, you see it in a simple diagram, that short movement here bursting forward allows that defender to go out, which molds even more space for them to take, for Denison to take advantage of in that second phase of the action there. Now, if we go into collective movements, so for me, the collective movements are quite important. The main actions that I'd look at are the central axis, and we do a lot of work around dominating that central axis, both defensively and attacking wise. So, and then from that, you can use your positional play and overloads, and the horizontal transitions will fit within that central axis. And then you've got the direct and indirect movements. So the central axis, so it's really important, this line down the middle, and how we really affect it will determine how we are molding the space in our attack. So you can see there, simple diagram, you've got space either side to attack there. Now, what I try to do is to get our fix to dominate either left or right and never be on this central axis in attack. What that can do there is shift this defender slightly, and you see how this space all of a sudden, by making that one slight movement to the right off the center, makes this defender tuck in slightly as well at the top, and automatically that space is increased already on that side. Although it might be reduced on this side, we automatically have an advantage on this side as well as a potential overload on this side. So you've got 3 players here, and you've got 2 defenders. You've got 1 central defender at the back, and then you've got the other defender on the other side. Now, the idea is to potentially create the numerical advantage. If the numerical advantage is here, it's important that these players recognize that, and we attack through this line here. If all of a sudden this defender comes off center, now we've basically done what we wanted to, which was shift these 2 defenders off that central axis. And now all of a sudden, you can see this space as well is now much larger than what it was before. And the advantage is potentially with the attacker, depending on who our attacker is. So it's quite an isolation in such a large space. And this is when those quick horizontal transitions come into play. Can we switch that play very quickly once these players recognize that the advantage is not here and the advantage is over there from having molded that space over there? Now, there's simple exercise that we go around sort of training this, which is we set up an area, sometimes half court, sometimes slightly less, so 20 meters by potentially 10 to 15 meters, and we set up a 5 by 5 meter square in the center there. What we try and get the players to do is that they're not allowed to pass the ball through this square, and they're also not allowed to run through the square. So it's a simple possession / rondo game. but these players can't utilize this square at all, and they can't run through it. So what starts to happen is that the attacking players start to occupy these spaces in between lines. Now, from that, we can create quick horizontal transitions and potentially overload this side, create the numerical advantage, and if not, we can switch the ball and switch it over to that side as quick as possible. That's how we try to implement our horizontal transitions throughout the season. Sorry. Similar with this exercise, where we set up 2 goals. We try to set up this central axis here, and what we try to do to get the players is play a standard 4v4, or you can underload the defender to make it quite easier for the attacking plays. But it's important that what we try to focus on is this molding of the space. So can we get the defender in between the lines to affect this side? Can we overload and create the numerical advantage on one side? And if not, can we attack through that side? If not, can we switch it using those horizontal transitions that we were talking about before and switching the play quickly and gain that advantage in the 1v1 zones that you can see at the bottom there. Now, to sort of attack the defense and see the defense and how they're set up, I see a lot of questions around, are they set up diamond? Are they 2-2ing? Are they 2-1-1? And what we need to try and forget those and forget the systems that they have and focus more on their actions in defense. So do they follow? Are they zonal? Are they compact? Do they split their lines? Do they press? Do they half court? Or do they go man to man, for example? And from that, we can start to create our tactics or look at certain game plans that then the players can execute on court. So another key thing, which are the direct and indirect movements. So you've got the direct curtain movements, which directly affect the players on the ball, and the indirect, say for example, curtain movements, which block or that affects the players not on the ball. So if we look at the direct movements, we potentially use them more against zonal half-court teams, even individual teams to help us get out of pressure as well. So simple direct movement would be either coming in front and blocking or overlapping there to help shift that defender inside, and then all of a sudden you've created 3 potentials there. You can switch the play, you can fire it into the pivot, or say you can utilize that player that's either blocks or overlaps there as well. Indirect movements. So an indirect movement, you potentially use it more against split defenses and pressing zonally, or individual defenses as well. Now, it's important to recognize the space in between the lines. So when we're talking more about before, when the space was laterally, now the space is centrally, how can we affect, can those players affect that space centrally? So what we try to do in individual indirect movements is getting players, say for example the winger, which moves into the center, and as this winger moves into the center, the fix opens up wide. So it's the same. So it's still a curtain movement, but it's an indirect movement because it's not affecting the player on the ball itself. And key points to this. So we've got the quick horizontal transitions when appropriate, understanding the most probable reward outcome, which is the players versus the space and recognition of that, and positional play to gain potential advantages in pockets of space. Now I'll go through a few examples here and how we went about them in the week before these games and how we planned for them. So looking at an individual defense or so either 2/3 or full court, for example. It's a quick video from the Spanish league here, which you can sort of see. Try and stop it. Now, individual defense, the space is in here behind. This player is utilizing the movement of cutting to attack that space in behind and therefore take advantage of that. So you can see here, the space is in behind. The defenders, they've set up as a 4-0. They've molded that defense in behind, that space in behind. And now it allows their players, either these 2 players or even the winger, to attack that space through cutting. See a lot of players in zonal defenses or half-court defenses cutting for no reason. So it's important to ask our players why they're cutting. Is it to attack the space? Is it to open up a passing line for another player? So as I say, the cutting action is important. But remember, foremost, it's there to attack the space in behind. So similar defensive system, which is individual. This is from a game against Birmingham this season, and we'll be looking at an indirect movement here. So you can see that the winger has come off the wing into the centre where the space was in the first phase of the movement. Now, automatically, we have now moulded that space over here on the opposite wing. If you watch the fix's movement above everything, which is the most important thing. Now you can see the fix is already attacking that massive space, which is generated by just the winger moving into the centre there. Allows him to get a shot off at the end. So a simple diagram to show how we sort of did that was we looked at Birmingham's defence, and we knew that in the first phase their lines would be split, and this is where the space would be in the first phase. Now, after that, we knew that from that we could create several different options. So the pivot on this diagram is on this side, and then the pivot on this side as well. So if the pivot's on this side, of course, we can either play it down the line as a pivot. We've got this player in the pocket to utilize. And if this defender was more aggressive, maybe the fix, rather than moving there, would move slightly negative, but it's still opening up a passing line there for the fix. And we've still molded this space for the second phase of the action there. Same movement, different game. So you can see already the winger has started to move in. And what we've created there is an overload and numerical advantage in the first line of their defence. Now, you can already see after the fix has moved in, the winger's moved in, that the fix already is attacking this space that's been left there. So it's important in that one to focus on the movement, how we molded the space, but then in particular, how quick those transitions were from side to side. So the ball crosses side to side 3 times, and we still get a shot off at the end of it. So looking against zonal compact defenses, which usually are half court, and how we can really create opportunities against these. As you can see on the screen, there's not a lot of space in the center. So ideally, the 2 spaces that we need to attack are the 2 channels. So, say for example, this season in the NFS, we played against a lot of half-court and compact defenses. So our idea was to create the attack in the first phase through the channels. And from that, then we could stimulate different finishing actions and how we go about that. So you can see there a box in the center, which we tried to keep the ball away from that box in the center. See, the idea, as I said, was to get the ball into the channels as quick as possible, and then see how we could mold that defense and that space to create those finishing actions. So the way we did that was with this simple exercise where I put a box into the sort of just in front of the goal, and the way we did it was we sort of told the players that the players couldn't play the ball through there or run through there, allowing those players and making those players play the ball around and do those duality actions, or those actions of 3 around this square, which we knew that the space would be limited at the weekend. And then we started to incorporate 1 defender, 2 defenders, 3 defenders, 4. Then we took away the square and introduced channels rather than the square, giving them more options, but then they still managed to execute more or less the same strategies. So that, like we said before, even going into the game, in a 4v4 normal game, what we introduced was channels, where we said the players had to play through in order to be able to score. And that was in the attacking half rather than the defensive half. So the areas, as you can see here, to focus on in the second phase was that area that we cut off in the first phase. Now, similar again, like we said, we always try to dominate the central axes, but if you can see in the bottom corner, we try to focus on those 2 corner areas where we knew that first action would probably take place. Now, I'm going to show 2 or 3 clips from the same game, and you'll see different variations of it, but the attacking system is exactly the same. So I'll play that again. So if you see, we already saw that this defense is quite compact. Say Bolton are a very good defense. And what we tried to do here was shift this pivot slightly inside to generate more space on the other side. You can already see the pivot in the top right corner start to move out to the other side because he knows that that ball is going to get transitioned from this side to that side very quickly. Now, as that happens, we know that these 2 defenders and potentially this defender are going to move over there very quickly. The space is going to be generated here or molded here in the second phase of the action, which is why our number 22, Charlie Kuhn, is attacking that space for the second phase and finish. Like I said, not a goal, but now you'll see the same action with a different finishing. So you can see here, Dennison has played the ball over to this side and starts to attack already this side because he knows Calvin's already opened up to the wing. The ball's coming into the centre and it finishes. So same again, we never play the ball through the centre because we know they're compact and we know how they're set up and they're very good at it. So we had to utilise those channel spaces to finish in that central space in the second phase. So getting the ball wide, and the idea was to try and shift this front defender in their first line, which we knew would come over to cover slightly, and therefore either attack that space in the second phase like that, and then a third option so same game again. This time, the players come over to block, and we've managed to penetrate that ball through to the pivot diagonally, rather than having to play it to the wing and then play it down the line. As we said before, Dennison's done that feint forward to then create that backdoor movement to attack that space in behind there as well. So like I said, 3 different variations, and this is that variation there. So the player could have played it across and then down the line, and then of course it would get squared to potentially this player still following in. But it managed to split that defense enough that that ball into the pivot was on first time and then was allowed to attack that space in the second phase. Game against Loughborough. So similar action. So similar actions to the Bolton game. Now this time you won't see Calvin. So Calvin is our pivot. He's predominantly left-footed. He's moved over to the left side where Jared is, just higher as the false pivot position. So Jeff's still going to attack that side. And what he really creates there is a 2v2 in a tight space. Now the defenders should have the advantage, but what we have created and generated is that and molded that space in behind there, which Jeff then, with his 1v1 superiority, can get that advantage, which makes Nathan Davis now offset off that central axis which we were talking about. And all of a sudden we've got a goal from it as well. So we need to be able to give our players, like we said at the start, direction against the opposition. But at the end of the day, it comes down to individual recognition of space. So it's important that we have our philosophy, our tactics, and our game plan. But the players need to know the variations and then can implement those on the court depending on how that defender reacts in a certain scenario. So what I'm going to do is show two different scenarios that we had in the same game and two different finishing actions. So the first scenario was when we got the ball into the pivot and the space was in front of the pivot, and that's how we finished. As soon as the pivot comes slightly forward, the space now is in behind. And it's important that the players recognize that to be able to finish their actions. So I'll go through this video and we'll show you how two different actions are finished. So we see in the first action, Javi's slightly shorter on this, originally on this 10 meter, where the 10 meter dot is, and therefore the space is slightly in behind, which Dennison can overlap and take advantage of that. Second action, Russell here, who's the false pivot in this situation, is slightly deeper, which allows us to create and mold this space in front of him, which now gives Dennison, same player, an option to shoot in front. So like I said, it's down to the players at the end of the day. So just to summarize and finish with some questions that all the coaches, I think, should ask themselves is, what is my playing philosophy? What team and opposition are we playing and how we will attack this team? What movements will be most likely? What sessions, exercises can get the team this output? And do my players understand what the plan is? But at the end of the day, it comes down to making sure that all those lower questions fit within this, what is my playing philosophy? If not, the strategy and the tactics, as I say, there's tons of information all over the internet. There's millions of sessions, millions of tactics, millions of movements. But you need to make sure when implementing that strategy or the game plan for that weekend and designing those sessions around it, that it fits in with that playing philosophy and overall identity of the team, and the players understand that. And yeah, we'll finish there.
All right, Juan. If anyone's got any questions, just if you can raise your hand, or you can just push it into the chat bar. I've got a quick one for you. I'll try not to go around the houses with it, Juan. You said that it's obviously really important that you obviously give the foundations, and that you give some actions to the players, and then they're the ones that go onto the court as individuals and try and recognize the space and put that in action. If you've got three players that are really trying to put in action the game plan, so for example, say you're playing against a team that are sitting half court and they are trying to use the width and not go through the middle because they're compact there, and one or two players when they're on the court are still moving through the middle of the court, trying to access that middle, how do you respond as a manager, and what are you going to try and give as a message to the team to make sure that that doesn't happen? Or what, you might have a really special player technically and manages to do things which they shouldn't be able to do, i.e. going through the middle and beating a player 1v1 as an example. What would you try and suggest as a manager to try and manage that and try and get the players to do what you're asking them to do, but at the same time you're giving them the responsibility and accountability to do it?
I think it's a great question. I think it's a tough scenario because I'd say people will often look at outcomes rather than the process. So say, for example, if we've managed to get the ball in the middle a couple of times and that player's turned and scored a couple of goals, they will see that as success, and it potentially may be working for a short period of the game. But I think the overall game plan, tactics, and an identity is as important. To see how we would adjust, you'd take that 4 off. You'd have a discussion around it, around which of the areas we're looking to affect, and sort of relating back to the week's work and what we've done in the week. Because I think that's the most important thing, is that you put an hour or two in a session, which could be 3-4 hours, and the players have done hard work over the week. It just seems a shame to sort of not go to that as the first option if the defense is set up like that. And as I say, sometimes the players need direction and need direction and recognition of where the spaces are rather than themselves. Because I say, goalkeepers can see it perfectly, managers can see it perfectly because they're off the court, and I think the players on the bench can see it quite well once they're off the court. Sometimes, as I say, players when they're on the court, based on emotional response, your logical thinking is reduced, so you won't sometimes utilize those spaces to your maximum. So yeah, I think it's important to just take time out sometimes, or have a conversation and make sure that they can adapt and approach as per the game plan.
Class. Okay, yeah, great. So Mark's got a question here. Do you need a certain caliber of player, not just technically and tactically, but all corners, especially psychological, to implement your playing style? Or do you still hypothetically implement this approach with players at a lower level?
It's a tough one, Mark. As I say, I know that's the question for even some football managers. Is it's the classic like non-league thing. Is we can't pass the ball around here, or we don't have the players to play the ball around here. I think you kind of need to trust your ways and trust that you'll be able to work with the players long enough to implement it. Like as I said, we're lucky this year that we have very, very gifted players and very hardworking players. Last year we had great players as well. I'd say there were one level of technical capacity just below what the current crop of players are, and that's no disrespect to them. That's just that some of our players currently are international players. But yeah, I'd still try and implement it. I'd still take, if we were playing like the likes of Helvetia last season when we were in Division 2, I'd still try and implement that style of play, especially off the ball. I know we've not talked about off the ball as much today, but yeah, I do agree that they need to have a certain mindset, and they do need a physical capacity to be able to keep that intensity up throughout the game. But that's where the responsibility lies on them. And I think we are getting into an age where we're not now counting on players, whereas like when I was playing 6, 7, 8 years ago, you were counting on certain players to show up to be able to play the game. I think now we've got squads that are big enough in a few teams that players can be dropped, players can be left out, and not necessarily on showing up for training, but in terms of their physical, technical, and tactical capacity. For me, the most important thing is knowing the tactics. If you don't know the set pieces, if you don't know the kick-ins, if you don't know the attacking movements, everything else becomes slightly pointless. You may have, like, going back to the first question, you may have 3 players on the court who are trying to implement one thing, and then you could have one player who you've brought in who hasn't trained all week and doesn't understand the system or doesn't understand what we're trying to do or implement. And as I say, we do have that luxury now where you can sort of pick and choose rather than having to count on players as we used to do.
Great. Cheers, Juan. Jamie's got a question here. Have you had examples this season where a team has set up completely differently to what you expected? And how challenging is it to alter a game plan and communicate that to players mid-game?
Yeah, so I think it was our first game against Worcester. We knew they would set up as a wide press, half-court wide, sorry. So the game plan, I'll be honest, our game plan was to overlap our wingers. So to get the fix to overlap our wingers and really affect those wide areas. So we wanted to shift that third man off the central axes and affect those and affect them that space. So it worked a couple of times, and then what they did straight away was change their defensive system and how they were going to defend against us. So we had to change things slightly, and that's where potentially we then had to put a false pivot in and try and do it around that way rather than the sort of what we had planned for that week. And we did put a lot of thought and effort into playing against that Y. But then, yeah, the guys were great and good enough to execute and adapt on court.
Cookie's got a comment on for you. How does and would you in possession approach after dependent on quality of opposition? I'll read that again. How would your approach to possession change or alter dependent on the quality of opposition? For example, if you qualify for UEFA competition, so if you're playing the Champions League, would it alter?
Great question. I think at the end of the day, you have to. Would it alter slightly? Yes, because the quality of defense is higher. Um, would you change your philosophy? No. I think you've got to stick with, say, for example, we try to attack very, very quickly when we've got it. Um, physically, the defenders will probably be better, tactically and technically. So we maybe have to be more patient, but at the same time, I trust the guys to be able to move those horizontal transitions and switch the play enough to maybe not break the line in the first phase or the second phase, but still try and do it in the third phase. Um, so I think that's important. I think if you were to go to the higher competitions or higher quality, um, playing against high quality players, sorry, and you sort of chucked everything out of the window, I think it's kind of disrespecting the players. I think we have players good enough in this country to go and compete against other teams. There's no reason why I would back all my players against, say, for example, a current Hovokubo team that were in the Champions League and progressed last season. I'd back them to give them a decent game in possession and out of possession. And that's through, as I said, practice in regards to what our philosophy is, then our strategy and the tactics. But yeah, I think we'd have to be slightly more patient. But as I say, the style would be the same.
Sean says, you mentioned a few times that on the court it is down to players recognising individual space, but suggested at the start that you tend to focus on team tactics. How do you or will you ensure you maximise the potential of the individual to take your game model to the next level?
Yeah, great question. So the way we go about it is we put a lot of structure into the, say, for example, the team tactics, but it's those tactics have variations and have possibilities or options. So when we're drawing up the tactics or the playbook, we'll focus on a action, but on that action we'll have 4, 5, 6, 7 different triangles that the players know will be variations or possibilities for the player to choose. And that puts a bit of responsibility and sort of accountability with the players. It's down to them how to sort of recognize and execute that. Now, if they, as I say, we work on that in training and we try and focus on those multiple different actions, so that on game day they can come up with the one that they see fitting on the day. Like you saw in the clip with Dennison at the end. We worked on playing off the pivot and the dualities and the vertical wall passes throughout that week, and then it was down to Dennison really and Russell and Javi to recognise where they were on the court, where the space was in front of them, and those potential that like we mentioned before, which outcome, which was going to give the best outcome, and which option was going to give the best outcome, and that's where we loosen those strings and we loosen the leash on the players. They have an overall tactics or skeleton, if you want to use the classic phrase, and then they fill in the muscles where they have to be. But you need to give them which muscles they could fill in, so they can understand that as well. I don't know if that answers the question.
Right. David has, from my experience, footballers converting to futsal who haven't played to a top standard don't understand that their movement impacts space or passing lines for other players. What's the starting point to teach players to mould space for others, and what sessions could you do?
Yeah, great question. So we put it in the slide. One of the best ones, or ones that I like to do as such, is making sure that you've always got. So we put down a central axes with either flats or cones. What we try to do, if you really want to dumb it down, is just do it as a possession drill. And what we try and do is, so the attacking team has 4 players and the defense team has 3, so an attacking overload. And what we say is that maximum you can have three attacking players in one of the sort of halves, and maximum you can have 2 defenders in one of those halves. Now the players automatically start to recognise that they need to move into to offer that support and create that numerical advantage, and how that affects then the 1v1 on the overside. What we what you do start to see is that the player who's left on the other side can sometimes drift in. So it's important to highlight that they stay outside and affect that space and mold that space inside as well. And then you can start introducing a goal into it where you get the ball to shift from side to side, and you work on space principles around that. And then what we try to do is the drill that we showed you before with the 2 goals, and how players can affect both sides of the court in potentially one action. And that's more or less how we go about it, is sort of progressing it from simple possession game to 1 goal, then 2 goals, and really highlighting how those players can affect both sides of the court by just their position and the space around it.
Last one. Brad, I'm not ignoring you. There's definitely going to be, you'll be able to download the webinar in terms of download the actual slides. We don't have that function at the moment. We might have something like that coming very shortly. Sean's got something to add on. And following on, do you deliberately plan for those player interactions the same way you plan for the technical, tactical actions? I hope you can remember the first question. Need a reminder, Juan?
Yeah, good question.
Right. Need a reminder, or you know?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking it's an interesting point. I think player, like I say, you probably know more than anybody from the discussions we've had recently around player behaviors. It's how you condition those. I think, do we deliberately plan for them? No. I think sometimes you have to see how certain players act in certain moments, and you have to understand that player and their psychology, as well as I say, the tactical and the technical side, but understand foremost their psychology and how they approach those actions or adapt to those actions. And I think from that you can then plan or react. So as I say, it's probably more of a reaction than an action, if that makes sense. But no, we don't deliberately plan for it. I think the stuff around players' behaviors is more reactive rather than active. Yeah.
Awesome. Something from me, Juan. How many hours do you put in as a coach? Because just looking at some of the stuff that you're putting on just in these slides alone, I can see the amount of detail you go down to. What would you say your week looks like in terms of preparation for a game?
Not sure if I should answer this because I think the miss is on the webinar as well. Yeah, it's a good amount of time. As I say, like everybody involved in futsal in this country has full-time jobs. So I can't put a time on it in terms of I think like we're not lucky at the moment because it's a bad situation that we're in. But as I said, we're lucky that we can effectively use this time to study stuff off the court. On a normal in season, I think you want to include in training times and games. You're looking towards the 30-hour mark, slash 40-hour mark. Pre-season, as I said, it's lucky that we can dedicate solely to as I say, coming up with game plans for the season, like I alluded to before in the presentation. And I think planning is the most crucial thing. If you haven't planned in advance at the start of the season, everything in the season becomes very, very difficult. If you don't already have an idea of how certain teams may play or how you want to play as a coach, your kick-ins, your set pieces, and what you're potentially going to do against certain defensive systems, then planning for certain scenarios and certain games becomes very time consuming. So it's important when we can get off the court for a prolonged period, pre-season, that we put in the same amount of hours that we would put when we're on the court and off the court at the same time, just off the court, and really, really delve into the details. And like we said, most important thing for me is a playbook and getting the players to understand that playbook. And then you can really, really cut pieces out for sessions, and then of course cut further pieces out for separate game plans as well. And I think most importantly, the players need to understand the purpose behind it. If they can see it all drives back to the original playbook and the original philosophy, they won't mind doing the extra work, and they won't mind really going to town on it as well. And like I said, I think we're in a stage where within 5-10 years this sport will become potentially professional in this country. I think a lot of people need to remember, before you can be professional and get paid for it, you need to act professionally and put in the hours without getting paid for it first.
Great. Has anyone got any last questions? Oh, here we go. Got one from Paul here. Do you put the same emphasis on opening up space when designing set plays?
Yeah, set plays. So set plays is an interesting one. If you mean so from the keeper, press breakers or movements from the keeper, I say yes, because it's a similar attacking principle, and we're trying to, say, attack the space that the defenders leave us if they're pressing us. From kick-ins and corners, I'd say it's more active than proactive. We move to create space, sort of mold the space how we want to finish the action. So set plays, kick-ins, corners will be one corner, and it may have 4, 5, 6 variations, and we will move in a certain way on the first phase, and then depending on how the defense is set up, we will execute and move that defense in the second phase how we want to. I say that I know we haven't been as lucky as we should have been potentially with set plays this year, but yeah, I think we have currently, I think we have 6, 7 corners, and in those you have 4, 5 variations. And like I said, it's important for the players to recognise on the court how the defending team is set up, and then how potentially we can use not just their setup but each individually to our advantage, and gain an advantage off that.
Last one. Really appreciate the level of depth in that, just in the attacking principles and the molding that space was great. So much appreciated. For everyone else, we're definitely going to be back in next week, so we'll let everyone know via social media handles who's going to be on next week. But really appreciate everyone turning up, and it'll be available to download as a webinar sometime tomorrow.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, Juan. Thanks.